My name is Janice Bennett, and this is my story. I live in America, and though I was born and raised here, there are still days when I feel like a stranger in my own land. That feeling grew heavier one Thanksgiving in Miami, when everything I thought I knew about family and loyalty fell apart in a single afternoon. I can still see it clearly. The kitchen full of steam and warmth, the ocean breeze slipping in through the half-open glass doors, and the table I had set with care for the people I loved. That holiday should have been a day of peace, of gratitude, of laughter over roasted turkey and sweet pies. Instead, it became the day my father robbed me of more than money. He stole my trust, my faith, and nearly the very roof over my head. The beach house had been my dream for as long as I could remember. I was only 20 when I began to save for it, working jobs that drained my energy but kept my hope alive. Over the years, I collected every dollar like it was a pearl. I told myself that one day I would own a home where the Atlantic waves rolled close enough to sing me to sleep. It was no small dream. In the end, that home was worth $277 million, a staggering number to anyone else, but to me it was the physical proof of every sacrifice I had made. I had poured my whole heart into it. And yet, on Thanksgiving, my father stood in my own kitchen with forged papers in his hands and told me it was his. He tapped the stack of papers against the counter as if he were knocking on my coffin. "Here it is," he said, almost with triumph. The ink shone too dark, too new. My name was written, but not mine. It was a crooked version, clumsy and hurried. Then he said the words that carved a wound into me that will never fully heal. "She's not my daughter. She's nothing but my wife's mistake." For a moment, the world fell silent. The clinking of glasses stopped, the laughter died mid-breath, and I could hear only the blood rushing in my ears. My mother, Evelyn, gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. My best friend, Maya, reached for my hand under the table, her fingers warm and steady, though I could feel the tremor in her grip. I wanted to scream, but the shock locked my throat shut. I looked at my father, Charles Bennett, the man who should have been my shield, and saw only hunger in his eyes. Not for food, not for family, but for power and wealth. The documents he held claimed he had bought the house and transferred the property to his name. The bold claim listed the value, $277 million, as though he could simply erase my years of sacrifice with a printed line of numbers. It was surreal, almost laughable, but the danger was real. I knew how convincing forged papers could appear in the eyes of the law. He believed he had outsmarted me, but he had no idea of the protections I had put in place long before that day. Years earlier, I had suspected this moment might come. My father's love had always been conditional, brittle as glass. He smiled when I succeeded, but behind his eyes, I could sense his envy. He spoke often about what he deserved and hinted at how his daughter's wealth should benefit him. I knew better than to believe in his affection. So I had crafted a secret defense. Hidden in a fireproof box were the true papers of ownership, each one signed with my real signature, clean, deliberate, and marked with subtle details only I could replicate. Alongside those papers were coded names and a secret signature, known only to me and my attorney. They were the guardians of my dream, my silent army against betrayal. My father, in his greed, had stumbled upon something else entirely. In college, I had once scanned pages of old notebooks where I practiced signatures for fun. For reasons I no longer even remember, I had saved them under a folder titled Old Naval, a nonsense phrase, a private joke from a younger self. Somehow, those pages had survived, tucked away on a forgotten hard drive. My father must have found them, thinking he had struck gold. He took those childish scribbles, copied the shaky lines, and passed them off as mine. He believed he was clever. In truth, he had signed his own failure. Still, the sting of that day lingers. Betrayal is not softened by the fact that it fails. When my father waved those papers and spat his words, it was not just property he tried to steal, it was my identity. He tried to strip me of my daughterhood, to erase the bond between us, and to humiliate me in front of the very people who mattered most. I will never forget the look on my mother's face, pale and stricken, caught between loyalty to her husband and grief for her daughter. Nor will I forget the way Maya's hand held mine, grounding me in the storm, as if to remind me that love could still be found, even when blood betrayed me. That night, I did not sleep. I sat on the steps of the beach house, the ocean whispering against the sand, and I thought about the choices I would have to make. I thought about the law, about the courts, about the price in both dollars and time that I would have to pay to defend what was already mine. But more than anything, I thought about the cruelty of a man who could look into his daughter's eyes and call her a mistake. It was not just theft. It was abandonment dressed as justice. Looking back, that Thanksgiving was the day I grew into myself fully. The child who had once longed for her father's approval died in that kitchen, standing beneath the weight of forged papers. In her place rose a woman who knew that love cannot be begged for, that trust once broken cannot be mended, and that the ocean is a better witness to loyalty than a man who covets what he cannot earn. My father thought he had won by showing his deceit. But what he really did was reveal the truth about himself, truth I had tried for years to ignore. As I closed the door that night and turned the lock, I felt a small measure of peace. My father had tried to take my house, my pride, my name. He had failed. What he did not realize, and what I would soon prove in court, was that he had never truly known me at all. He knew only the daughter he thought he could control, the girl who might have yielded. But I was no longer that girl. I was the woman who had outwitted him before he even began. And so, though that Thanksgiving was the darkest day of my life, it was also the beginning of something stronger. It was the first chapter of a story I never planned to tell, but one I now carry like a torch. The story of how I stood against my own blood, and how, in the end, I chose myself. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke with a heaviness that pressed down on my chest like a stone. My father's words still echoed in my ears. She's not my daughter. She's nothing but my wife's mistake. I knew those words were meant to crush me, but more dangerous than the cruelty was the forged deed he had waved before me. I could not afford to wait and hope it would vanish into thin air. If I hesitated, even for a day, I could lose the very house I had built my life around. So I packed my bag, slid the fireproof box into a locked case, and boarded the first flight to New York City. Miami's warm breeze gave way to the icy wind of Manhattan in late November. The city was loud and impatient as always, its streets crammed with taxis and bundled pedestrians, but I hardly noticed. My destination was a quiet law office near Wall Street, where my attorney, Lawrence Ruiz, had promised to meet me. He was the kind of man who saw problems not as obstacles but as puzzles waiting to be solved, and that was exactly what I needed. When I arrived, I handed him the locked case and paid a $50,000 retainer in cash I had withdrawn just before the holiday. He raised his eyebrows at the amount but said nothing. Money, I knew, was a language lawyers understood. I wanted him to feel the urgency, the gravity of the fight we were about to begin. Inside, I told him, sliding the case across his mahogany desk, is everything we need. The original signatures, the coded names, the secret signature, proof of ownership that no forgery can match. He opened the case carefully, as if he were unveiling treasure, and examined each paper with practiced eyes. My real signature stood in stark contrast to the shaky, uncertain lines my father had copied. Side by side, they looked like two different worlds, one authentic, the other a cheap imitation. Along with the signatures, Lawrence found the trust documents bearing coded names only I could explain. Each name was linked to financial transfers in dollars, every transaction clean and documented. I had built this paper fortress years ago, knowing one day I might need it. Among the papers lay a folded letter. Lawrence picked it up and asked if it was part of the evidence. I hesitated before nodding. It was a letter I had written to myself years earlier, a promise that I would never allow anyone, not even family, to rob me of my dream. If you are reading this, it began. It means the battle has come. Stand firm. The house is yours. It was simple, almost childish, but when I wrote it, I knew my heart was speaking to my future self. Now it steadied me. Lawrence wasted no time. He called a judge in Miami, the Honorable Rebecca Cole, and filed an emergency motion. By sunset, she had issued a freeze order preventing any transfer of the beach house until the case could be heard properly. It was only the first step, but it was enough to let me breathe for the first time since Thanksgiving. The court hearing was scheduled quickly, given the urgency of the matter. Judge Cole sat tall behind the bench, her expression sharp and unreadable. She listened as Lawrence presented the evidence and laid the original and forged signatures side by side. Then she turned to me. "Miss Bennett," she said, holding up a document, "can you explain why the file history on your father's evidence includes the word naval?" The courtroom rustled with whispers. I felt my cheeks heat. It was a joke, I admitted, forcing myself to meet her gaze. Years ago, in college, I kept a folder with that name. I don't even remember why, something silly with my roommates. I scanned old practice signatures into it, never thinking anyone would take them seriously. Those scans are what my father used. Judge Cole raised one eyebrow, then glanced back at the shaky signature on the forged deed. So, these were not genuine signatures, merely practice copies. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "My real signature has specific markings, details I've kept private for years. They are in my true documents." It was strange, almost humiliating, to have my private jokes and personal habits aired in a courtroom. But I also felt a surge of power. My father had underestimated me. He had thought my youth and carelessness would make me weak, but it was his own ignorance that betrayed him. After the hearing, I found my mother waiting in the hallway. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slumped, her eyes wet. "I should have stopped him," she whispered, as though confessing to a crime. I touched her hand. "You didn't sign those pages." "He did." "This isn't on you." She shook her head, tears brimming. But I knew how he was. I knew, and I let myself believe he wouldn't go this far. There was nothing I could say to ease her guilt. The truth was, we both had known. My father had been a man of appetites, money, power, control. He was never satisfied with what he had. I had built defenses around myself because I saw it coming. My mother, trapped by her loyalty and her vows, had chosen to look away. That same week, the police took my father into custody for fraud and forgery. Watching them lead him away in handcuffs was surreal. He looked smaller, shrunken somehow, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of his schemes had finally broken him. He did not look at me. He did not look at the ocean he claimed to own. He stared at the floor, as if even the ground would not forgive him. That night, I returned to the beach house. I unlocked the glass doors, stepped inside, and sat on the cool tile floor. The sound of the waves filtered through the windows, steady and eternal. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt the house breathe with me. It was as though the walls and windows had been waiting, holding their ground against the storm. I touched the floor and whispered, "We made it." But the fight was not over. My father would hire lawyers of his own. He would challenge every paper, every mark, every detail. He would not give up easily. Greed never surrenders without a war. I knew this was only the beginning, that more hearings, more filings, more sleepless nights lay ahead. Yet in that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. The papers had saved me, but more than that, they reminded me of who I was. I was not the fragile daughter he thought he could bully into submission. I was a woman who had built her own fortress, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, signature by signature. My father had forged a lie. I had written the truth. And in America, sometimes, truth has a fighting chance. The trial stretched across months, long and heavy months that tested every ounce of my resolve. I learned quickly that truth in America does not travel in a straight line. Even when you hold proof in your hand, black ink, notarized stamps, witnesses who can vouch for every detail, justice crawls at its own pace. I had expected a battle, but I had not expected the waiting, the endless days when nothing seemed to move except the bills piling higher on my desk. By the end of the first month, I had already paid an additional $120,000 in fees. Expert handwriting analysts, forensic accountants, filings stacked so high they blocked the light from my office window. To cover it, I sold the Boston townhouse I had once called my second home. It was a beautiful property, with brick walls and ivy climbing the edges, but I signed away the deed without hesitation. When the ink dried on that sale, I felt strangely numb. I didn't cry. Instead, I saved my tears for the mornings in Miami when the ocean outside my beach house turned gray, as though it too were weary of carrying my burden. The courtroom became a second home of sorts, though not one I welcomed. Every day I walked through the tall wooden doors, past reporters waiting with their hungry questions, into the cold chamber where my father sat at the defense table. He never looked at me directly. Sometimes I caught the side of his face, his jaw set stubbornly, his mouth twisted into a grim line. I wondered if he felt shame or if he simply calculated his chances, counting the odds as if the truth were a gamble he might still win. My lawyer, Lawrence Ruiz, stood steady at my side. His voice carried across the room with the authority of a man who knew the weight of evidence. When it came time to present the secret signature system, I felt my chest tighten. Lawrence displayed enlarged images of my real signature, pointing out the subtle marks, tiny flourishes in each letter, almost invisible to the casual eye. They were like heartbeats hidden in the ink, deliberate and consistent across every true document I had signed. Then he placed the forged papers beside them. The difference was unmistakable. Where my signature flowed, my father's forgery stumbled. Where my letters carried quiet strength, his trembled with impatience. To the jury, it was as though two different people had written them. And in truth, two people had. The daughter who had built her home with determination, and the father who tried to steal it with lies. The coded names in the trust came next. Each name, strange to outsiders, but carefully chosen by me, matched financial records down to the dollar. Wire transfers, deposits, payments for construction, all lined up in a chain of evidence as clean and solid as the beams holding up my house. The jury listened intently, flipping through binders of exhibits, their eyes widening as they traced the trail of my foresight. I could almost hear their thoughts. She had prepared for this. She had known. When it was my father's turn to defend himself, he spoke with the bitterness of a man cornered. He claimed I had tricked him, that I had turned against him without cause. At one point, he even accused my mother of conspiring with me, of trying to erase him from the family. His voice rose higher and sharper until Judge Rebecca Cole warned him to control his tone. Watching him unravel on the stand was painful, but not surprising. Lies have a way of collapsing under their own weight. At last, the jury filed out to deliberate. Hours passed, each one stretching like a year. I sat with my mother in the hallway, her hand resting over mine, her thumb tracing slow circles on my skin. Maya came, too, bringing sandwiches we barely touched. I kept staring at the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for the truth to return in the form of a verdict. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom held its breath. The foreperson stood, holding the paper that would decide everything. His voice was calm but firm. We, the jury, find the defendant, Charles Bennett, guilty on all counts. The words struck like a bell. My father's head fell forward, his shoulders sinking as though the weight of the verdict pressed him into the chair. Judge Cole sentenced him to many years in prison, her gavel coming down with a sound that marked the end of his scheme and the beginning of my strange freedom. I did not feel joy. There was no triumph in watching my father condemned. Instead, I felt a wide, quiet emptiness, as if the tide had gone out and left the shore bare. It was like standing on the beach at low tide, seeing all the things the water had once covered. Broken shells, scraps of seaweed, sharp stones that cut if you stepped too carelessly. Justice had been served, but the cost was written everywhere. In the dollars I had spent, in the sleepless nights, in the broken image of the man who was supposed to be my protector. The reporters descended soon after, their cameras flashing, their voices overlapping. They wanted the big number, $277 million, in every headline. They wanted to tell the story of wealth and scandal, of a father-turned-thief. I gave them only a few words. Numbers are loud, but harm is quiet. Harm is the sound of a father pointing at his daughter on Thanksgiving and turning her into a stranger. They printed the numbers anyway. They always do. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my sense of normal. I spent one winter in New York, walking through snowy streets, hiding beneath scarves and heavy coats. I visited museums and drank hot chocolate in quiet cafes, pretending for a moment that I was just another woman living an ordinary life. But at night, I dreamed of the beach house, of the sound of waves against the shore. By spring, I returned to Miami, unable to stay away. Back at the house, I began to heal in small, deliberate ways. I painted the upstairs room a soft white and hung a photograph of a lighthouse above the bed. It was a reminder that light could stand against darkness, steady and unbroken. I planted seagrass by the deck, watching it bend and sway with the wind, but never uproot. I cooked simple meals, grilled fish, fresh vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. I wrote in a plain notebook each evening, and this time I did not give the files playful names. I had learned that even jokes can be twisted into weapons when placed in the wrong hands. Through it all, the ocean remained constant. Some mornings it was turquoise, bright and alive. Other mornings it was gray, flat, and heavy like my heart. But whether bright or dark, the ocean was mine. The house was mine. The story, though scarred, was still mine. And in that truth, I began to find peace. Years passed, and the weight of the trial began to fade into memory, though the scar it left never fully healed. I lived quietly in my beach house in Miami, building a life that was steady and mine alone. I filled my days with writing, with tending the seagrass by the deck, with long walks by the shore where the Atlantic waves rose and fell like a metronome keeping time. The ocean became my confidant, the steady witness to all I had endured. It was on a spring morning, when the bougainvillea had just started to bloom along the gate, that I received the letter. The envelope bore the seal of the State Corrections Department, its formality a warning of what lay inside. My father, Charles Bennett, was to be released from prison. The words were simple, unemotional, but to me they struck like a drumbeat. He would be free again, walking the same air, maybe even stepping into the same city. That night, I sat on the steps of my house and watched the tide edge closer, the same tide as always, relentless and unchanging. For a moment, I thought of Europe, of people who traveled there to heal, to reinvent themselves in cities where no one knew their names. But my healing was not across an ocean. It was here in America, in the very house that had been both the battleground and the prize. To leave now would feel like surrender. Days later, he came. I heard the creak of the gate before I saw him. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, my heart steady, my breath even. The man who stood at my gate looked nothing like the father I remembered. His hair was white, his hand shook, and his back curved under the weight of years. Time had not been kind to him, though perhaps it had been just. "Janice," he said, his voice weak, almost fragile. "I'm sorry." The words floated on the air between us, but they did not reach me. I stood rooted to the ground, hearing not his apology but the echo of his voice on Thanksgiving years earlier. "She's not my daughter. She's nothing but my wife's mistake." I remembered the forged lines, the clumsy signature pulled from an old file, the way my mother bent at the counter like a bent spoon under too much pressure. I thought about the trial, about the endless hours of testimony, the expert reports, the crushing cost of truth in dollars and time. I thought about how he had never once looked at me in that courtroom, never once offered a word of regret until the walls of prison had closed in on him. Now, when his freedom was fragile, he wanted absolution. "I don't forgive you," I said, my voice steady, not cruel, simply final. "I wish I could, but I can't. I won't let you near my life again." For a moment, I thought he might argue. I braced for excuses, for self-pity, for the familiar sting of his words. But instead, he nodded once, slowly. He looked past me to the ocean, then turned his eyes to the street. Without another word, he walked away. I closed the gate and locked it, pressing my head against the wood. I wasn't cold. I wasn't angry. I was something else entirely, settled, like the earth after a storm. I was a woman in her own house, with her own name, speaking in her own voice. That night, I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the wide windows overlooking the shore. I counted what was left, the way I used to count savings when I dreamed of this home. I had paid dearly, hundreds of thousands in legal fees, years of tension, the loss of the father I had once hoped would love me. The price had been more than dollars. It had been measured in time, in sleepless nights, in pieces of myself I would never get back. Yet as I sat there, I knew it had been worth it. The house was mine. The story was mine. And more importantly, I was mine. I had kept the key, not just to the beach house, but to my own future. I opened my notebook, the one I had filled each evening with fragments of my days, and I wrote a final line. I am Janice Bennett. I live by the water in America. My father took his hands off my life, and I kept the key. I closed the notebook, placed it on the table, and let the sound of the waves carry me into sleep. For the first time in years, my dreams were quiet.